What's up, guys? Welcome back to the King of Hearts podcast. We are just another Christian podcast, which, that's kind of what our topic is about today, if you saw the title. But Jake, how are you doing today?
Feeling good, man. A little bit earlier today, so I think we're both a little bit tired, but other than that, I'm feeling good, ready to go.
Isn't that weird that it's earlier in the day and we're both more tired?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely more of a night owl than an early morning person, so.
Yeah. But, guys, today we have a very interesting topic because it is almost like an attack. It's almost like an attack on us and literally any other Christian podcast that doesn't have more than 100,000 followers. Basically, I was scrolling on TikTok the other day, and I see this video of this dude just calling out like every Christian podcast, saying, we're done with Christian podcasts. So I'm gonna play this video for you guys and to show Jake real quick, so you can kind of see what we're talking about today.
We do not need any more Christian podcasts. We have so many. We're good. We have just so many. No more, please. If I have to sit through one more Christian podcast clip on my feed with a bunch of Christian influencers talking about nothing, saying nothing, the same regurgitated sayings like, the Lord gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. God's never going to give you more than you can't handle. The guys just talk about modesty. The girls talk about their season. If I have to sit through that one more time, I'm going to puke. Better yet, I'm going to jump off a bridge. And everyone just sits around and they're like, wow, that's so good. Preach on it, yes. And then we wonder why this generation knows nothing about scripture. It's because anytime a Christian gets like a little bit of clout, like 50,000 followers, they're like, you know what I need to do? I need to start a podcast teaching about the Bible. No, you do not. You got clout because you were thirst trapping anyways. You were just following truth. No one needs to hear you teach on scripture if you haven't even been taught yourself, like you haven't taken a class or been mentored. It just doesn't need to happen, bro. Don't get me wrong. There are some great podcasts with some intelligent people that are teaching on scripture, but there are a lot of crappy, sucky Christian podcasts that are just garbage. Like you are dumber if you listen to them. I'm over.
Okay, so
That was interesting.
that was interesting. Okay.
Yes.
I just want to know, like, what are your just straight up thoughts about that video?
No, that video was definitely interesting. I think it calls out a problem that a lot of people think that they need to be teachers, when I think most people, especially me, when I listen to other Christian podcasts, I just want them to be vulnerable. I just want them to talk about their experiences in a wise way, not like a super emotional way. And for me, that teaches me more than listening to any sermon. I listen to podcasts over sermons now. I used to be more of a sermon guy, but now I just want to listen to vulnerability and hear about that. So what do you think?
I thought the video was very just not a loving way to approach a problem. Like, I didn't like the way that he was talking to these Christian podcasters, and the way that he said he would rather jump off a bridge than listen to them. I just thought that was just not a loving way to call out other Christians that are obviously trying to do good or help in some sort of way. So I thought the video in itself was just kind of just an attack on people that he probably doesn't even know much about, or what their goal with the podcast even is. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts.
What do you think would have been a better way to approach it?
I honestly just don't know if there's anything that needs to be approached. I don't see there being a problem in any way. So I guess I disagree with you on that. I don't think that anyone that has a Christian podcast just shouldn't be doing it, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah. Didn't we watch a video recently that said you're going to grow exponentially when you start a podcast?
I didn't watch a video.
Okay.
Like
I heard something on that. Maybe it was actually on a podcast, but if you actually start it, it kind of helps you keep yourself accountable, if that makes sense. So for me, what I do is after we record, I listen back, and obviously we do reels and stuff throughout the week. So we get to see ourselves and what we're saying. And a lot of the times I'm like, man, I wish I would have said that better. Or maybe I wasn't being fully transparent, or maybe I could have been more transparent and that would have helped more people, stuff like that. So you become not more critical of yourself, but you understand that hey, I have issues, and even when I'm trying to be vulnerable about them, maybe there's a better way to go about it. So I think that's a good way to say that. If you start a Christian podcast, I think that definitely helps you grow a lot more than it hurts you, And obviously, a video like that, if there's any other small creators out there who are feeling a little bit insecure, Like that, I feel like that would definitely like discourage them to not keep going.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like hurtful to think that like, you know, what we're doing just because we're not a big time pastor, we haven't been like a big influencers for lots of years, that we just like don't have the right to have a Christian podcast. And like, honestly, even if, let's say we have like one of those sayings, like regurgitated sayings, like you never know like who's going to deliver that at the right time to the right person. So I think to just say that there's too many people saying the same thing, you can't complain about everyone speaking truth. So I don't think that he should say just because someone else has spoken the same thing that no one else should.
That's good. That's really good.
So, and also like us, we get maybe 100, probably like 100 listens an episode, like combined, I think total.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. And if you think about like our podcast compared to a bigger podcast such as like Girls Gone Bible, like they average over 100,000 on just YouTube alone. So the cool thing about our podcast is that when we go to church, we still will have people come up to us and tell us how our podcast impacted them. And I think to say that, you know, even if it's just one person, to say that that's not worth it, I think that's just a lie, and that's evil, honestly.
That's really true. That's really true. That definitely, like, I feel like he's kind of promoting like a perfectionist mindset in a way. Like you have to be like good enough, or you have to be knowledgeable enough to be able to like talk about what you're going through in a way that people will be able to listen and actually follow. Because like you said, man, like there's no better feeling than someone coming up to you and saying how something you've said impacts you. Especially after last week, bro. Like I'm a big words of affirmation guy. So like whenever I hear that, I'm just like actually touched. Like it really means a lot to me to know that someone like genuinely cares, you know, and they're taking time out of their day to listen to what you're saying. And, you know, even if you're not some pastor, you know, even if you're not some leadership director, like, you know, to know that like one of your other peers is listening to you, like for me, that just like changes the game. It gives me a lot more motivation to keep going. And that's happened before when we've been in like a rut, for example, like in the podcast, like we haven't wanted to do it. We haven't wanted to post anything. And then we'll have a guy come up to us at church and he'll be like, hey bro, I listened to a podcast like 3 months ago, and it just like completely changed my life. And I'm like, okay, God, that's like, that's definitely a sign that you want us to keep going. You know, even though sometimes in our own spiritual walks, it can get hard.
Yeah. And like, for instance, the last time someone came up to me at church and they talked to me about how one of our episodes impacted them, it was like, honestly, a good reminder because I was struggling with the same thing that episode was about. So
wow,
it's cool
okay.
because like it shows that, you know, even stuff that we've recorded in the past and we thought we've gotten over, like those episodes can like still help us out, you know, even though we're the ones that recorded them. So I don't know, man. I just like I hate that there's people out there that are just actually making videos just to put down other people, especially like other Christians. That just doesn't it doesn't sit right with me. So I know this is a very like specific episode. But that video really did hurt a lot because I just know so many people that are trying to start podcasts. I know there's some people that we know that listen to our podcast that are younger than us, and they like our podcast so much they're like, we're gonna start our own podcast, and I think that's awesome. I think that's great because honestly, I think that having a podcast like this, it even if you're not trying to teach, it does teach you a little bit how to speak better. So like, let's say one day one of those kids that is following in our footsteps ends up being a pastor. Like something like this could help them learn how to actually speak to an audience, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It also helps you talk about your struggles more too, like actually communicate those in a way that I think is wise, you know, like I can't say like everything that's on my heart and in my mind all the time because there's a certain part of me that still isn't like healed necessarily. Or if I talked about it, I would be talking more out of emotions than out of a place of wisdom. And I think like being on a podcast, it helps you to understand like what you say and how you say it actually matters. and it can impact people in ways that you can't even imagine. And you need to go about that in a wise way. You know, it's like, I think that's something else. But also too, to touch on something you said earlier, I've heard so many things the last few weeks that I've heard 100 times, but it'll just hit differently coming this time. So like, for example, one thought that I struggle with sometimes in salvation is that I didn't have like a legit like experience because I was 5 years old. You know, I didn't like know much. I was very like young, right? And like, I don't know how to communicate those feelings without sounding like I'm not a Christian, you know what I'm saying? But I know the truth. I know that God has changed me, that I am a new creation. I don't have those same desires that I have. I live to please God and to honor him and, you know, not worry about the opinions of others. But like sometimes the devil will remind me of when I was 5 years old. And a lot of times, like, I know this is the devil talking to me. He'll say, Jake, like, you didn't have a real experience, like you're not saved. And when that thought will cross my mind, I will tell myself, why would the devil convince me that I'm not saved? Because, well, I mean, God would tell me that. God would tell me that I'm not saved so that I'll get saved again. And then we were at a Bible study, and my friend brings up this example about Jesus being tempted for 40 days and how the devil brought up verses from the Bible to try to get Jesus to do wrong. And I've always heard that story. I've always known that the devil is going to try to sound like God. But when he said that, I mean, my mind just completely blew. And I was like, I've heard that story 100 times from podcasts, from sermons, from Bible studies about like the devil saying stuff like that. But I've never equated it to the fact that my salvation experience sometimes is tough for me because I'll compare it to others. So of course the devil's going to try to tell you, hey, maybe you're not saved, so that your mind's going to try to spiral out of control because you know that you're saved, but the devil's going to tell you that and try to sound like God. It's like, that's an example of like, I've heard that on podcasts many times, but the fact that someone was willing to tell me that again out of faith, even though it's a common story, it just completely changed my perspective. So I love that you brought that up.
What's also interesting about like a truth being repeated is like literally the whole entire Bible. It's just consistent truth. And like literally, I forget how many, what's it called? What's it called when you're reading something in the Bible and it also says it somewhere else?
Cross-reference.
Yes, I think
So.
Isn't there like thousands of like...
Tens of thousands.
Oh,
maybe hundreds of thousands, yeah.
So if you're going to get upset with people about, you know, saying the same thing over and over again, then you probably should just be mad at God because that's not really an accurate thing that you can be upset with, because that's exactly what the Bible does. The entire Bible is just a repeated fundamental truths. So
I got a trivia question for you.
What?
How many, and Ryan can answer this too. How many times does the Bible repeat the phrase, do not fear?
365.
365, right. And I'm telling you, bro, every time I read do not fear, it hits me a different way every single time. Because I'm like, oh man, like yesterday I was like afraid, you know? I'm not just like, oh, I know not to fear because it said it one time. Like literally, like God brings truth into your life over and over again when he knows that you need it. So like you said, I don't think it's fair to, you know, make fun of that too. Like to make fun of like repeated truth. Like that's not, I don't think that's okay. I really don't. Yeah, I've heard people say this, and this is kind of like a joke, but like a lot of Christianity is plagiarism. Like if you hear something good, from a sermon or from a podcast, like you'll probably end up repeating it to someone else. And that doesn't mean that you're like fake. It means that you're taking what you hear, you're applying it, and then you're sharing it with someone else. That's all that it is, you know? I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think it's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question for you. I do think this guy could have gone about it way better, but I do think a lot of people on podcasts try to teach, and maybe being vulnerable would be a better way to go about it. That's kind of my opinion on the video. You've changed my perspective on like, okay, there's a way better way to go about it. But how do you think maybe in like, if you see a problem that another Christian is going through, or maybe just Christians as a whole, how do you think would be the best way to go about it so that someone else is receptive?
I think that if you're going to call something like that out, like honestly, if you're going to call anything out in someone, I think you just need to do it in love, like just do it the right way. Do you remember, I think it was 1 Corinthians 12, 13, where it talks about love? Where does it talk about love?
1 Corinthians 13.
13.
Yep.
Okay, it's in there. It literally like is a cheat code. It tells you how to love people the right way. So I think if you call people out with that, rather than, you know, trying to shame them into listening to you, I think that would probably work a lot more because me personally, I don't really listen to people that are calling me out in the wrong way. So,
Yeah. No, I'm thinking the verse that says, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. Literally, that third part says it's not arrogant or rude. So there's a way to call out in love that doesn't require shaming them publicly, right? And like that guy has that platform to do that, you know?
Yeah.
But that's not loving at all. It's just mean. Yeah.
that was arrogant and rude.
Yeah. No, it seemed cocky to me too.
It was.
But honestly, that's convicting for me because we talked about this a little bit off air at like in the middle of this podcast, but like I didn't like see a huge problem with it at first. Does that make sense? I thought he had a valid point. And then you start to bring up these things about how he wasn't loving, how he wasn't nice. So like for me, that just like ding ding in my mind, like I can't call somebody out and be like that. Like no one's gonna be receptive to that. Like that just shows like pride in my heart. So I honestly hate that in myself that I didn't see that earlier, you know? Like I had to have another believer say that. So that's very convicting for me is like how much pride like you have to have inside of you to like not see other pride. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it. I think for me, if I'm struggling with something and I get made fun of about it, like that kind of shows me that I can't actually be vulnerable with you and I can't tell you like why I'm struggling with that specific thing. So I think that's like another thing. That's another reason why you have to call people out the right way, because if you call them out the wrong way, they're probably never going to go to you like and tell you anything about the actual problem.
No, that's true. That's true. There are a lot of issues, I think, that in the Christian world that a lot of people aren't willing to talk about it because they're afraid they're going to get judged or made fun of. I think a good example is like a lot of Christians struggle with like homosexuality and they can't talk about it because people are going to make fun of them, right? And that's not fair. That's not fair. That's a struggle that people have. But, you know, because like just because like you don't have a certain struggle doesn't mean you can make fun of someone else that does. In the same way, like we talked about last week, like if you have needs and I have needs, like I can't make fun of you for your needs because they're not my needs, you know? So I think it's very important to not approach people in that way, not to laugh at people like that, but to genuinely listen and hear them out. And understand why maybe people act a certain way before you just make fun of them about it. So yeah, this episode has honestly helped me a lot. So I thank you for, you know, talking about that and calling out the injustice, you know, even like if you have pride mixed with truth, like you're going to completely throw people off. They're not going to know what's truth and what's not. They can't trust you if you do that, you know? So that's really, really powerful for me. So thanks, Chris.
Well,
Christopher.
Thank you, Jake, and thank you guys for listening to us another week. This is going to be our last week in this space. Next week is going to be a whole nother location.
Another ball game, baby.
It's going to be great. We're going to have like real walls. I don't know if you guys can tell. These aren't real. They're not real. It's all fake. Thank you, Amazon. But yeah. So yeah, thank you guys so much. We will see you back next week.
Peace.